How you doing?
Oh no, we're live right now, actually. Okay, that was kind of weird. It was actually just very little technical difficulty in the beginning. I did a countdown and it still didn't start live. But we're actually live right now.
I
And
don't hear you.
oh, you hear me? Let's see. Let me do mute and unmute. You hear me now? Hey, everybody, but we're having a little technical difficulties in the beginning. I'm trying to see if my guest can hear me. Do. Oh, project. Okay, so wait, let me detour a little bit. Well, I'll just say, everybody, welcome to Expose the Manosphere. I have Naama Kates, who is the founder of the Incel Project. We have a little technical difficulties because she can't hear me, but I can actually hear
No,
her.
you're good.
Oh, she can hear me? Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Oh, wait, she's back. Okay, I was waiting for her to come back. So, but no, this interview, actually, I've been in contact with Naama Kates for well over a year. She'll be back, actually. She logged off by accident. So yeah, I've been in contact with her for a year and I actually really enjoyed her work. It kind of informed me how I think about various issues and how I approach this topic. So I'm actually very delighted to interview her, but I know she'll be back soon because she accidentally logged off. This is actually the most difficulty I've had with a live stream. So I do apologize, everybody who's currently watching. Okay, I'll bring it back. Okay, you're back. Yes.
Okay, I'm back.
Like I said, I apologize, everybody. It's just a little difficulties, but it's perfectly fine. As you know, it's the first time I have actually something scrolling down the screen. I decided to give that a shot for the first time. But, I know people are going to come in gradually and we're approaching 2 minutes. So without further ado, I do want to hop into the interview. So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So yeah, the first question I have is, can you tell me about yourself? Like where you're from, where you grew up, your childhood, and what you do for a living?
Sure. So I grew up in Connecticut, pretty close to where I live now, which is not too far from New Haven, um, as many people have discovered at this point, I suppose. Not that it's a secret. So yeah, I grew up here, a pretty smallish town. Um, and I have an older brother, a little bit older. I would say a pretty um, unremarkable childhood in many ways. Um, and I don't know, as a kid, I was interested in a lot of things, the arts especially. My mother was an artist, and just kind of a lot of basic nerdy pursuits. I loved reading, music, theater, musical theater, and also computers. I was a huge internet girl. I remember getting AOL when I was like 9 or 10 years old, and really just enjoying it and being really kind of interested in it and fascinated by it. So I went on to study computer science in college, and then I lived in New York City for a while, where I sort of explored music and writing and all the artistic interests. Moved out to California for a long time, um, where I started working more in film and production, writing, pretty much every aspect of that process, including doing, audio production and composing for commercials. Um, and that'll lead me into the sort of this project, but I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, so yeah, I'm kind of curious. How did you become interested in studying incel culture and interviewing self-identified incels?
Well, I had sort of been living in California, as I said, and working in film, and I got really burnt out by that industry. It was I liked many aspects of what I did, but many of them, sort of the business aspects and a lot of what kind of went into it, was either boring or demoralizing. Um, and as sort of a comfort, I think I did an artist residency for a few months in Finland in 2015, I believe, or 2016, and I started listening to podcasts a lot and getting really into those and becoming really fascinated by storytelling in that medium, audio storytelling. And a lot of the podcasts I listened to were sort of investigative ones, a lot of the sort of typical podcasts that people started out liking, like Serial, that were true crime. And I'd always been interested in telling those kinds of stories too, and discovering the audio format was kind of a revelation in itself. I realized I'm a lot more auditorily inclined than visually, which is, kind of a problem for film. And creating a podcast and telling a story that way is a lot less expensive. It requires fewer people. There are many benefits, and I also found the confines of it, the limitations of it, made it even more kind of creative and more personal and intimate. And the topic of incels was something that percolated for a while before I realized it was something I wanted to do. There were a couple news stories that came up that I was really interested in and began kind of digging into and writing about. The school shootings, a few of those that came up were fascinating. And then the term incel sort of entered my awareness at some point in 2016, 2017 also. And it kind of kept on coming up more and more. I found the language really interesting, all the terms. And then I had a sort of happenstance encounter online with someone who identified as an incel. And we started talking, and I was recording the phone calls and finding them really gripping to listen to. So I had, befriended and become very involved with Crawlspace, the host of my, the network that my podcast is under, their umbrella, the Crawlspace Media Network, and they had a lot of great true crime shows. So I thought about possibly developing a show for that network, and I realized that might be a good topic and might be kind of in line with what they were doing. So I wrote a treatment for it, and they were great about it. I mean, they were very supportive, and it's kind of how it started.
Okay, that's gotcha. I always thought I'm always kind of interested in the business aspects of radio and not to mention television, particularly entertainment in terms of like how something gets into production when people pitch something and how do they go through hurdles. But you actually had a pretty easy time when you pitched it.
Yeah, I mean, I had many much more difficult times leading up to that with pitching projects for film or for music, getting grants and things like that. So, I had a lot of experience with pitching things that had some promise and fell through lots and lots of times. I mean, that's kind of an LA thing too. And Crawlspace is based in New England, where I live. They're from Worcester or Boston, and I guess it was easier to sort of communicate with them. And yeah, relatively speaking, it was smooth sailing.
Okay. Okay. Was this before or after the Toronto van attack when incels became mainstream?
I would say that my interest in it started a little bit before, but my
Hmm.
actual research and study was definitely after. I mean, it was around that time, though. It was probably the summer, late summer of 2018, and that was April 2018. So close.
Okay. Yeah, like so I first came across it in March 2018, just a month before. And I remember the
Mhm.
Elliot Rodger incident, but it just wasn't talked about as much after that tragic incident that occurred.
Yeah, no, the Van attack really brought it into, public awareness.
hmm Now, this is kind of a basic question. I just want you, can you like, for people who don't know, can you define what an incel is? Because I know since it became mainstream now, it gets like thrown around, but most of the time it's not even applicable when
Yeah,
people use it.
most people don't know what it is. I mean, we recently had the case in New York City with that YouTuber whose name I'm not going to say because I think that's kind of best practices, even though I can't really avoid it for the show. But there was a YouTuber just a month or so ago who, um, had a kind of an incel slash black pill content channel, who pulled a lot of stunts, and he had it was a hoax. It was a bomb threat in New York City in a restaurant, and he got arrested for that. And this was just a month ago, but the agents that dealt with him had not heard of incels up until that point. So for people like us, it's mainstream, but I think on the aggregate, most people still don't know. An incel is it's a short portmanteau word for involuntary celibate, and these are young men usually, but they can be um, women, though that's kind of disputed in the community, that it really can be anyone that identifies themselves as being involuntarily celibate. So they can't succeed in making sexual or romantic relationships despite wanting them. And that's probably a condition or a situation that can apply to many people. The definition is also pretty vague. Some incels think that you have to be a virgin to qualify. Some think that it's a period of 6 months or more. That kind of goes on and on. But generally, that's what an involuntary celibate is. But someone that calls themselves an incel and participates in the online communities and reads about the black pill and takes on that identity, that's sort of what we're talking about more when people think of incels. It's an identity in a community that is has been tied to some violent acts, and it's been labeled terrorist group or hate group in various countries and places, and is known for being misogynistic.
I'm kind of curious. 'Cause you did allude to something. Why is there a tendency to call like almost anybody who commits an act of violence, especially if it's like for some about women, an incel? I remember there was a shooting in Tallahassee, a yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida, and people call him an incel, even though he never even self-identified as such. And I've seen this in other incidents around the country and also in other countries.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and that's definitely something that goes on. Depending on who you ask, whether they're people in security or counterterrorism or academics, there's been anywhere from 5 to say 15 or maybe even 20 now incel-related attacks like this. And you're talking about, the Chris Bayarley shooting, and I think that a lot of those associations are very flimsy. They don't really stand up, but it's easier. I guess it makes an easier narrative for people to say this was an incel killing. People always look for an explanation as to why an atrocity could occur. How could a young person just, mow down innocent people on the street or shoot other young people at a college campus or whatever it is? These are heinous, unthinkable acts. And in the media and in other places, we look for an explanation to kind of tie a bow around it. It's usually very complex and it really defies explanation, but it's an easier narrative to say, well, this was an incel killing.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. So I have listened to your podcast. Unfortunately, I haven't listened to it a whole lot because like dissertation work just got got me pretty busy. But I know you seek to give incels a voice, while journalists who write about the community and often do so in abstract terms and with negativity. So, and I'm kind of curious, since being in a minority can certainly take a toll on somebody. What motivates you to keep going?
I think it's important. It didn't start out as something that I necessarily thought of as doing some kind of social good. And I still sort of hesitate to characterize it that way. It started out as just an exploration, something I found interesting and I thought people would find interesting. There wasn't a lot of coverage about it, and there certainly wasn't any, and to this day still really isn't any, either from academia or from media, of primary source coverage where people are actually speaking to incels or people from the community. There still is a dearth of that. I feel like my show is still one of the only ones to do it, and it is, as you say, it does put me, it kind of placed me as like a dissenting voice, which isn't something I set out to necessarily do. But once I started talking to these people and realizing that, well, they are people, and a lot of them aren't hateful, and a lot of them are funny, and they're smart, and they're young, and they're troubled maybe, and they feel aggrieved, and they're going through things, but they're people with stories just like anyone else. And at this point, now that it's been going for a few years, I would consider some of them friends. They're
Hmm.
people. So I've been sort of thrust into this position of being an expert on this topic, and I speak at panels for governments, for universities, for security, corporate security firms, you name it, because people are kind of at a loss as to what to do about what they see as a growing threat. And I feel like I'm seen as someone who understands the community because I've built a rapport with them. And I just think it's important to sort of give my take from my, from what I've learned actually speaking to them so that they're not all lumped in as this boogeyman as they currently are, because that's always a mistake to do. Even if you find a group of people really reprehensible and disagree with every single one of their ideas and want them, cast away, behaving in that way and othering them and dehumanizing them does not help the situation, even if that's your goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. So, wait, how close are those relationships you form? Because I know you interviewed various people.
Yeah, I've had over 50 episodes of the show now, a lot of them featuring, different incels, sometimes even more than one in an episode. And there are many that I speak to not for the show, just various online platforms that want to tell their story for whatever reason or ask certain questions, or just they find something in my show that makes them feel, sometimes rightly, sometimes maybe not, like they would be understood by talking to me. And people want to be understood. These are lonely people a lot of the time. And, this is kind of, I guess it's refreshing for them to hear their people in their situation talking freely without judgment. Um, and then I would say that there aren't too many like this, but a good amount. The friendships and the connections with them kind of, ebb and flow as any of them do. Sometimes if I have someone on the show, I keep in pretty close contact with them leading up to it and shortly after, because they're telling their story in a vulnerable way, and I don't want to leave someone like that hanging. They might sometimes regret it after it comes out or something like that. Um, so it'll ebb and flow, and I might talk to that person kind of regularly for a while and then stop, and then it might kind of come up again for some reason. But there are a few, like I said, maybe a dozen or so, and I can name some of them that I talk to regularly, and we just kind of joke about things, and they might share some article they found or something they want me to talk about. Sometimes they'll just talk about, regular stuff, shooting the shit, recipes and whatnot.
That's pretty cool. I mean, at one time I did get a message from the whoever runs the Incel forum. He actually messaged me on Twitter and told me to watch my content, which I was kind of shocked
Oh yeah,
by that. Yeah, he liked the video I made about dating coaches and them like charging like $700, sometimes $800 for like, dating courses. And he just thinks they're ripping people off, but yeah, so he liked my critique of it.
That's cool. Was that the account at Incels Co?
Yep.
Yeah, Master. He's great. He's been on the show a lot. He's really smart.
Oh, okay. Now I'm kind of curious. Look at another comment. What exactly is the black pill? Because I've listened to some black pill channels, but I still don't even have a clear understanding of what the black pill actually is. I was looking at this comment. This person made.
Placido, yeah.
Yeah, please see them. Yep.
So yeah, I think the black pill is not really cohesive. So that's probably why you don't have a clear understanding of it, because there isn't really one to be had. The people that sort of put the black pill together and cull it together, the ones that work on the black pill wiki or the admins of, incels.co now.is, have their own sort of definition for it. But the basic one is that it is a series of studies that kind of expands on a worldview, coming from a derivative of the red pill. The red pill, which has been used in the far right and other places in the Manosphere and the alt-right and other places now too. It's all over the place. Comes from a concept from, the Matrix, that you can either take the blue pill, which is live in blissful ignorance, or take the red pill and learn sort of the harsh truths about humanity and about life. So that's what being red pilled is. And those communities have their own kind of definition. The black pill, I would say, is a derivative of that, that is more fatalistic, more sort of cynical. And a lot of people will refer to the scientific black pill. And that really is that it is, unlike a lot of academics and people, in the kind of counterterrorism field, they characterize the black pill as an ideology that is violent and hateful and calls for violence. That's not true at all. There's nowhere in the black pill that actually calls for violence in any way. That was, a few of these outliers, these Elliot Rogers and Chris Harper Mercers, that kind of came up with those ideas. And they're very fringe and they're not generally supported at all. But the black pill takes studies from evolutionary psychology and dating apps and social media, just things that point out aspects of human behavior like lookism, like the fact that people that are considered more attractive or taller tend to get better jobs or are in more positions of power. Female sort of dating preferences that they cull from Tinder data, things like that. These kind of studies make their way into the black pill and inform that worldview.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I was about to jump to another question, but I saw somebody in the listeners. He actually asked a question and then follow up. He says, some feminists believe that the term incel in itself is misogynistic as it puts the onus on women, the involuntary part, for those young men not getting any intimacy. And in a follow-up question, he said, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define the word. As you might know, that term initially, involuntary celibate, was actually coined by a woman, a queer woman, Alana Boltwood, who was she's now a computer programmer, but in the late 90s, I believe, she was in university and she was doing a project about loneliness, and she called it the Involuntary Celibate Project. And so that's where its roots come from, actually. Yeah. So that kind of created a little community of people who talked about their trouble finding intimacy. Obviously, that's different from the current sort of iteration of the community. But while some incels believe that women can't be incel, I'd say maybe the majority do, because they think that women are more sexually selective. Not all incels believe that. So I don't think that it's necessarily a misogynistic term.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it really does put the onus on women, but I see how it can be seen that way. I mean, don't we want the onus to be on women? Don't we want to be able to make choices of who, we date in that respect? So I don't think it's misogynistic.
Oh, okay. That's fair enough. Okay, it's funny. I laugh at this comment so much. Like, I don't understand why people ain't tired of taking these pills. I make jokes about the pills. I'm like, this
Yeah, they're addicted.
Oh my god. Okay, so yes, I want. So for many folks, incels are difficult to sympathize with, given what they've read and seen in the news. Do you think your work actually changes people's perception, regardless of its limited reach? All journalists at the end of the day are limited in terms of who they can actually reach out to.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, that's a well-worded question, because I think it does change people's opinions, and it is also a very limited reach that I have. Even at the heights of popularity of the podcast, even if you're in the top 5% of podcasts, it's still quite a limited reach compared to an outlet like a Vox or a Vice or whatever else that people might access much more widely. So in that respect, yes, I always hope that it does. I get loads and loads of messages from listeners, all across any demographic. A lot of them are women, different age ranges and stuff, that tell me that it has changed their opinion about incels. So, I take that as sort of affirmation that at least it does for those people. And then I have been, because I go and speak at these panels to a much broader sort of, that have either a much broader reach or a much more kind of specific and targeted reach of practitioners or professionals or people in various industries that are asking for my opinion on these topics, then I think in that respect, it's going to have an even wider reach than just the show, because the show has put me in touch with people that are actually making policies and coming up with interventions and, training mental health professionals and law enforcement professionals. So in that respect, in a subtle way, I think it might have more of an effect.
Okay, actually, it have an effect on me. I know some people wonder why I don't make a lot of videos on incels. And I'm like, no, because I kind of understand them, and a lot of them are pretty young for the most part.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more, sympathetic. I'm a little bit more, I'm much more critical of people who are like around my dad's age and like complaining. Because that to me, it's just kind of bizarre to me when I see somebody same age as my dad and like still complaining like they're a teenager.
Yes, I agree. I remember talking about this with you pretty early
Mhm.
on, which is that one of the main differences between incels and other groups in the manosphere is the age range. And also, this is often tied to age range, but not necessarily, but the limited experience.
Mhm.
Like it's one thing for people that have never had much contact with women at all. Um, some who are terrified of it, or who've been bullied mercilessly, or who feel that women don't even see them. It's one thing for a group like that to complain about women. It's kind of understandable. It's another thing for people who've been married and have children and, female friends, or have had them, to talk about how awful women are.
So I'm kind of curious. It made me think of another question. So, because I've been on like incel forums when it became mainstream out of curiosity, I'm kind of curious. Do you think they have some legitimate points? Because even the Manosphere, although I'm very critical of it, I will admit that they do make good points here and there, but sometimes they kind of like obscure them with like very like fringe talking points that it kind of just disrupts the original point they were trying to make, or undermines it, I should say.
Yeah, that's exactly how I describe it. I think they make a lot of fair points. They have a lot of legitimate grievances. I do think that our society nowadays, especially thanks to social media and things like dating apps, has become increasingly narcissistic, shallow, photoshopped, curated, you name it. It's culturally, I think that intimacy is something that we're beginning to struggle with, just because of the way we engage so much online with these very false kind of 2D images of ourselves that we all create, and with dating apps that allow people to, not even be shown profiles of anyone under 6 feet, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
That's not how friendships work in real life. That's not how attraction works in real life. And I do think it's changing the nature of things, at least for, I don't think that most people live their lives dictated by that, but at least for a certain kind of age group or a certain phase, it does. So I do kind of think that there are some legitimate points about people who don't necessarily fit whatever's in vogue, and especially people that are introverted, people that are, for instance, on the autism spectrum, neurodivergent, shy, late bloomers, to feel marginalized. I think
Mhm.
that that's legitimate. And I also think that um, dismissing these grievances completely is not right, and it's not fair. Um, and I could see why that would lead people to feel, um, sometimes even kind of persecuted. I don't think that they are persecuted, but I do think that they are marginalized to a degree. And then when they start kind of opening the floodgates and bringing in all the conspiracy theories, it undermines that point.
Mhm. Okay, that's kind of yeah, I do agree. Like sometimes the manosphere they bring a lot of like misinformation or fringe science to back up their points, and it just
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's like I don't know where this is going right here. So yeah, there's another question. Actually, kind of interesting. I usually say questions for from the audience at later, but I don't want to miss these actually. So, oh, the John Smith yet again said, "Hi there, love your stuff. I'm just interested in your guest thoughts on the MGTOWs and if they are the same as incels. Thanks." I will add there was a joke in the manosphere that like MGTOWs are incels and denials. I don't. It's just a joke that people say, but
Yeah. I think that I'm not in the business of telling people how to define themselves, how to define their own sexuality or their own preferences. If somebody says that they are involuntarily celibate, then I will take them at their word. If someone says that they are choosing that, as MGTOWs do, I take them at their word and don't want to impose my own definitions on them. But I've heard the joke, and I do get why people say it. Maybe in some cases they're doing it to kind of take ownership of a condition they're not happy with. But I think what I've seen more often than not from MGTOW is a lot of older men, at least older than, on the aggregate than very young kind of incels. And a lot of divorced men too that aren't virgins, and that have had experiences with women that it appears to me went sour or broke their heart or whatever. And this is kind of their position as a result. And they bring in a lot of societal factors into this, but I think that's kind of at the heart of it, if I dare say. And I have no business saying that. That's just a observation.
Now, I would say have you watched some MGTOW channels? I mean, most of it are like, more middle-aged men who are divorced or want to like had a bitter divorce or like a
Yes.
bitter child custody dispute.
Yes, exactly.
And that's usually their main gripe, actually.
Exactly.
It's kind of bizarre. I mean, I know guys that had horrible experiences with women, but they don't really go that to the far end.
Right, exactly. And there are many women that, have that same sort of position with regards to men, but they don't have a group called, FigTow or whatever it would be. But, I think these are very kind of personal problems that people have had relationally, and they project it out onto the world as a result.
Okay, and we have $5 super chat from BigJTripleX, longtime supporter. When I had less than 100 subs, what would be the solution to the Incel/MGTOW issue, social and government wise?
And government wise, so I don't know what would be the solution to the issue. I don't know that there really is one. I think that in society there are always going to be people that are unhappy with their lot in life and have struggles with relationships. I mean, there have been since the dawn of time. They just didn't necessarily have these clubs and these labels and these groups. And I think a lot of that comes from internet culture and the way we are becoming increasingly polarized and sort of stratified. But so I don't know that they're solving it in that respect, but I think solving the problem of very toxic fringe radicalizing possibly communities would start with listening to these grievances, not banning them, not censoring them, having open dialogue with them so that they don't feel aggrieved. And I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I think that would have to be a step.
Yeah, and there's another question. I was actually going to skip this because he's a critic of mine, actually. But I decided to just pull it out. He's like, I personally think society is done in terms of dating. Women can almost always continually chase men out of the league due to social media. Women have no reason to date on their level. What say you? Now, personally, I disagree, but I'll just leave it as that.
Yeah, I disagree too, but I know that that's a feeling that a lot of people have.
Yes.
Women can chase men, but who's to say what's out of their league and what's not? Men can also chase women out of their league or not, and I do understand that there's a bit of a tipping of the scales that JR is probably referring to, and that it is a lot easier because I do agree that biologically, and a lot of people might disagree with this too. I don't know that this is right, but it makes sense to me that to some degree women are a bit more selective sexually for all kinds of reasons, whether it's just cultural conditioning, social conditioning, or something evolutionary. I don't know, but I think that might be true. But I think that if we're going to go with that axiom, then I think that it's also true that while it might be easier for women to find men to sleep with them, it's not necessarily easier for them to find men to stay in relationships with them. And I do think that when most women at some point in their life at least want that more. And if you think that women are just chasing men around, chasing Chad, as a lot of incels do, and that they're
Hmm.
satisfied with meaningless sexual encounters, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I remember one time I read an article and it said that although it is easier for a woman to obtain sex than a man, there also are more consequences.
Yes, of course.
Because men aren't really shamed for being promiscuous, but women are. And
Mm-hmm.
I've read plenty of stories of women like committing suicide after they were kind of like shamed for having
Absolutely.
sex with whoever. But only time I've seen that with men is like if it's a homosexual relationship. I never seen a heterosexual man actually harm himself in any way because of being shamed for sleeping with a woman.
No, and a homosexual men, it might happen if they're shamed for their sexuality, but
Hmm.
if that's not the issue, then they're not shamed for, being promiscuous, not at all, whether they're gay or straight, but women are, and women also have physical consequences of, you know pregnancy, childbearing. They are more likely to get sexually transmitted infections than men,
Hmm.
all kinds of things. um, and while, our sort of medical and technological advancements have even this a little bit, they never will be, it will never be completely even or level.
Hmm. No, that's
So
true. I mean, I don't want to get off topic. I'm like, you could talk about that for days about the inequality and like the hookup culture. I read an article about that in the New York Times once. Yeah, yeah, I would say I don't think women don't benefit as much as people like to think.
no.
Um, okay, so yeah, I do want to get back to my to my questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so since Toronto van attack, the Canadian government intended to label incels as a terrorist group. And of course, as you know, the US military issued a warning about the group just prior to the release of the Joker film. And have these actions affected your work in any kind of way?
Oh yeah, and that's when I saw that question, I thought that's great. I don't know if you were paying as much attention or if you just happened to touch on this, but that affected my work immensely. The direction that it went, because when that happened, that was October of 2019, and my podcast had just been going for a couple months. I think it was on episode 8 or something, and that happened, and a lot of people started reaching out to me from counterterrorism kind of communities. And so I covered that, you know, the it was the Alec Manassian, his interrogation was lifted, the ban to publicize it was lifted. So it all kind of came out, everything he said. So I covered that extensively, and also the warning on the Joker movie, and also the reaction of the incel communities, and also the Reddit bans that ensued, which was brain cells. Certain incel communities were banned. So that's when the podcast kind of turned in a direction of being a lot more about about the issues with terrorism label, with the violence, with security, with censorship, and all this kind of can of worms opened up. And it
Hmm.
definitely changed the direction, and made me start covering it from that angle a lot more, and also introduced me into that sort of field.
Oh, okay, that's good. No, that's kind of curious. Yeah, I remember there was actually a warning too from I think it was the Air Force about
Yeah,
incels. Yes.
yep. That was one of the first ones. And then it was actually an internal, it was kind of mischaracterized because it was an internal memo for the military to watch out for certain behaviors among their fellow servicemen.
Hmm.
That was kind of mistaken as a warning to the public. But it foreshadowed, a lot of other warnings that were to come, like from the Texas Department of Public Safety followed, and then other governments started issuing this. And, now it's officially listed as not a terrorist concern, but a targeted violence concern, which is single issue violence, and it's male supremacist groups.
Okay, and
So
this is by the American government or also the Canadian government as well.
the American government, the Department of Homeland Security, is
Okay.
given that label. The Canadian government has not yet listed incels as a terrorist group. I think that the very interesting ruling for the Alec Manassian trial changed my mind. I thought that they were going to, but I don't know if they will now. But they're certainly on everyone's radar. They're starting to be. I speak with UK a lot. You know, they have their own sort of strategies and terminologies there, but they're definitely, they have people in their security and in their, you know, police forces and stuff aware of this issue and learning about it. So yeah, I think in a lot of the Western world that's starting to happen. Just yesterday, I did a symposium that took place in Norway about incels. So yeah, the Western countries are becoming aware of this.
Okay, I was going to jump to another question, but I just want to pull this up because this is a perception I see all the time. Where Ricardo Ronde said guys can get sex if they trick, which is prostitution. There's no such thing as an incel, and I know that's kind of that's a point that's actually talked about within incel communities.
Yeah,
About like,
so they would say that escort cells, they call it escort cells for those that do engage, you know, in sex with sex workers, but they kind of consider if you have to pay for it overtly and it's that transactional, then you can still be an incel. There's a little bit of dispute about that, but most of them wouldn't kick you out of the club for for doing that.
oh, okay, that makes sense. And there's another super chat from Big J. He says, BigJTripleX, do you think changing the education system and economics for working class males would change the mindset of the incel and MGTOWers?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that indirectly, it would be a very indirect change. It wouldn't necessarily be, you know, linearity is usually not the solution to this kind of problem. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people that make policies, you know, think. They think in linear terms, like, okay, we address A by doing B, and that will change the outcome of C. And it's really not that simple because it's a complex problem. But I do think that education is definitely a first step. Being educated just on, I don't know, a lot of things, you know, understanding sort of different groups of people, being kinder to each other, being educated in general about the effects of trauma and isolation, you know, and sort of gender politics, I guess. I think there's a little bit too much of that going on now. And while I understand it, I understand where it comes from because there has been a lot of inequality. I feel like now we're at a point where men and women are almost at odds with each other. I just think that I certainly don't know what the solution would be education-wise, but I think that that's a necessary component. And then economically, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the opinions of incels where they talk about the 80-20 rule, you know, the Pareto distribution, and that it's not, we're not Pareto efficient, and the fact that, you know, they talk about a genetic lottery and sort of the sexual or physical beauty haves and have nots, it very much mirrors the financial situation, the economic situation. You know, there's a huge disparity between the haves and the have nots. It's the Matthew effect, or whatever you want to call it, where the rich get richer and poor get poorer. You know, I'm not saying that I have any kind of fiscal solutions, but you can see that one mirrors the other. And it's just sort of a feeling of being unlucky in life and being born dispossessed. And I don't think that people that feel they have agency in general in life would call themselves incels. They usually don't, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's one question that came up. I know where this person get going to. He's like, "Hello again. Does you guys consider groups such as the Proud Boys incels?" And I know, so oftentimes on at least on the political left, when there's a group that people don't like, they kind of arbitrarily call them incels.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, no, white supremacist groups, they notoriously have they're not really voluntary celibate. They actually, you know, they engage a lot of sex, even like among each other. They have affairs. I'm like, no,
Right.
there's a lot of
Yes.
nefarious
That's
activities.
just using it as a pejorative, and I think that that's unfortunate that people do that, but it happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And oh yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, it's Pen Pal Minds from the Netherlands. Thank you for that super chat. And okay, yeah, I do. Yeah, there's one question I wanted to go to. So the main incel forum changes domains quite often. So I'm kind of
Mhm.
curious, how does this affect the larger community? Because it's believed that when you deplatform people or a group, that they become more radicalized.
Yeah, I think that's true. Um, it really is kind of hard to say, but the main the main incel forum, incels.co, now incels.is, because their domain was just seized again like a couple months ago for actually very false accusations by someone that wanted it down apparently, and the host just didn't want to deal with it anymore. um, they move around. That's not really deep platforming in and of itself, but it was originally founded in response to the Reddit ban of our incels. So, when a group is deplatformed and censored, first they have to migrate. And while there may be less of them in total numbers, while it may be a little bit harder to sort of find, the more fanatical, if you want to call them that, which I don't think they are, but if you want to, let's take this example with a far right group, for example.
Mhm.
So, if you have a group like the Proud Boys, which I think is, kind of a nationalistic group, maybe it's a little proto fascist, I don't know, but they're not as extreme as a lot of other groups. But let's say people are concerned about them. In Canada, they were designated terrorists, and they do, have certain tendencies that people are concerned about. If they are then deplatformed off of a place like Reddit, they move to somewhere that is, again, a little harder to access, but the more extreme voices will end up in there, while the moderating voices will be capped out. So that's the first effect, first order effect, more of an echo chamber. Second order effect, harder to monitor. Third order effect, confirmation of the idea that they're being persecuted, right? And all of these
Mhm.
groups feel that they're being persecuted. Groups like the Proud Boys feel that whatever, white men are persecuted. Incels feel that men less attractive, non-chads or whatever, are persecuted. And if they are deplatformed and relegated to sort of the margins, then they are literally being marginalized. And it confirms this narrative, and it it creates a much more, it really exacerbates the echo chamber to where you don't have any outside voices and there is no dialogue. And when dialogue is off the table, that's when people might begin to see violence as a recourse. Only then.
No, that's actually a really good point. That's not one reason I know sometimes, critical to Manosphere and people accuse me of flagging their channels. I'm like, I don't do that actually. I mean, because I'm not trying to shut you guys off. I think what you guys say is kind of weird. I challenge it, but
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in deplatforming people.
Yeah.
And
No,
I'm very moderate, by the way. People think I'm very like fringe. I'm like, no, I'm pretty moderate.
no, yeah, I know that you are. And,
Mhm.
someone else, I mean, not to necessarily bring this sort of trivial thing up into the more serious interview, but when I would talk with Obsidian, um, back and forth, it seemed like you both had a certain amount of respect for each other, and it just kind of seemed like, because of the um, polar opposite positions you held in terms of your work, it seemed like there was more of a difference there than there really was. But I think you actually would probably get along if you actually spoke.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? I mean, we're not. I grew up 45 minutes away from Philadelphia, Lehigh Valley, so I don't know. We might have something in common.
Yeah, maybe
He's
that's
about the
it.
same age as my dad, though. That's why he kind of makes me scratch my head when I hear him talk. I'm just like, wow, you could be old, but you could be my dad. Actually, he's only a year younger than him.
Yeah, no, I know. There's definitely a generational difference also in the humor, things that were, I mean, we've become a lot more kind of precious and sensitive and proper in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, that's good. But things that were just kind of considered satirical or comedy, even just as recently as like the early or mid aughts 2000s, it's very different now.
Hmm. Yeah, true. Yeah, I wonder, can you talk about the evolution of the Incel Project? Like, how has it evolved since your first episode?
Well, when I started, I thought I'd be doing a limited series, like 10 episodes or something. I remember in my New York Times write-up that I got really early on, I didn't know, and they asked how many episodes it would be, and I think I said 10. So obviously that's changed. I thought I'd be telling a pretty linear story of, you know, finding out about this group and maybe kind of focusing on one person and following, having some kind of breakthrough that would be
Hmm.
wrapped and done in 10 episodes, and maybe kind of imposing an artificial narrative arc if I had to. But then, as you pointed out with that, what happened in October with, the governmental warnings, the Joker movie, the Alec Manassian trial, it took this turn of being something that was more about the news and more kind of journalistic. And so it just kept going. And now, it's still going. And I'm not releasing episodes every single week, but pretty
Hmm.
much. And there are just a lot of stories to tell. And obviously, this is becoming more of an issue, at least gradually. It's kind of ramping up in the news. So I'm
Hmm.
following that story and telling these other personal stories as I go along. I don't know how long I'll keep it going. At some point, it will run out of steam.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I told you, I'm going to definitely end this channel sometime in the summer, and if I don't, it'll definitely be in the fall because I think I'm like, eventually you kind of just run out of stuff you want to do and want to say, and it's like kind of ready to move on to something new.
Yeah, you know.
Okay, so I only have like two more questions. One's just a question I always ask for everybody, and I definitely want people from the audience to ask questions if they have. So yeah, we have a $5 super chat from Diamond Princess. What do you think of men who don't like women for their dating choices and making fun of their appearance?
Men who don't like women
Women
for
for
their
their dating choice. I
dating
guess men who
choices.
criticize women for their dating choices and make fun of their appearance.
Oh, for the women making fun of the men's appearance, or the men make fun of
I
their
guess
appearance.
it's women making fun of their appearance. Oh no, men making fun of their appearance. My bad.
Well, I mean, obviously that's obnoxious, and it can be offensive, and it's childish, and it's immature. It comes from a place of pain, of feeling rejected and neglected. So
Mhm.
it can be hard to empathize with that if you're a woman hearing this nonsense. But if you have the will for whatever reason to try and step back and realize that it's coming from a place of pain, then maybe it's a bit more understandable.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So, what is your ultimate goal with the Incel Project? Actually, kind of for me, this is like an archives channel, and I'm going to keep it up even when I'm like abandoned it.
You're you're going to abandon it?
Oh no! So I'm good. When I say abandoned, I mean when I just stop
Oh, uh-huh.
uploading videos. I'm going to keep it up as an
Yeah,
archive.
absolutely. Oh, I'm going to keep it up forever too. I mean, I think it's a wealth of data for I have like doctoral candidates and students and people writing me a few times a week at least,
Hmm.
um, that are now doing like a thesis on this, because it's becoming this topic. So if they can find data in my podcast, then great.
Okay, that's kind of good. I see one question. Things like, wait, what did incel? Why don't the incels see they're lashing out in violence? That's crazy. I kind of disagree. A lot of them actually do condemn. I mean, there are some fringe people who like celebrate Elliot Rodger and whatnot, but most of them actually condemn violence.
Yes, the vast majority do. Very, very few of them actually, um, condone the violence. A lot of it is ironic if they act like it. I've had one person on my show ever who said he agrees with the violence, and he was a 19-year-old kid who went from being a jihadist to a white nationalist to an incel in the space of 2 years. He had physical deformities. He was a drug addict. You know, it is a very, very fringe opinion. And I also don't think he would have ever done anything. I mean, he rarely left his house. It's a population that tends to be very introverted, high in hib, as they would say. So they're really not, and I stress this to, security firms when I speak to them, they really are not likely on the aggregate to be committing even sort of petty level crimes. You know, So yeah, I would say that very few of them don't see that as.
Okay. And we have three. I see three questions. I see two super chats. I'll get to them. So yeah, for the third time, the John Smith yet again. He has to ask some interesting questions. Does you guys think the online pickup artist community, such as Roots V, exacerbated the incels?
Yes, they absolutely did, because one of the original kind of proto incel sites, Elliot Rodger also never used the word incel. A lot of people don't know that, and the media sort of made the connection between him and incel almost a year after the Isla Vista shootings. But one of the sites he did frequent was called PUA Hate.org, I think. So there was a strong reaction against the PUAs from incels that I think really kind of fueled that community.
Oh, no, I agree. Actually, yeah, I've read articles about the link. I know some people. That's why some people call the current dating coaches PUA 2.0, because how much money they're charging for these courses. They're literally just nothing more but a regurgitation of the content that already exists on YouTube.
Yeah.
So we have Doc MH with a $13.99 super chat. Well, Canadian, I think. Yeah, I think that's Canadian. So I used to be a former psych, I guess like psych incel due to BPD, OCD. Did therapy turn it? Wait, did therapy turn it around and now becoming a psych? Who wants to help? Who wants to help with BPD, OCD, ABD incels? What advice could the guest give? I got a chat.
I mean, that would be great, and I'd love to talk to you. There are those kinds of cluster B personality disorders and others are actually pretty common in the community, and not to stigmatize or anything. As you know, obviously there are a lot of processes like cognitive behavioral therapy and DBT and stuff that really help with that. But some of the kind of known, of the very few that there were, incel attackers also had combinations of some cluster B disorders with maybe like an Asperger's syndrome or autism spectrum. So that's really important to have a perspective from someone like you. A lot of them don't realize that they might be suffering from some of these comorbid conditions, and that's what's giving them so much trouble socializing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's terrific. That's really important. We need that. We need things like that.
Okay, and the trickster pill $5 super chat. Sorry. What do you think of people look maxing? Focusing too much on their looks can lead to narcissism.
I don't think it can lead to narcissism, but I think sometimes there is a narcissism already that it kind of exacerbates. I think that there's also body dysmorphic disorder, pretty rampant in the community.
Okay, no, I do agree.
A certain degree of looks maxing is actually really healthy in that it can build confidence. It's positive. It gives people hope, and things like working out and just generally taking care of one's health can develop self-discipline. It helps with mood. It's good for a lot of reasons. An excess of it or focusing too much on it is obviously unhealthy, but I don't think that it's kind of a chicken or an egg situation, and I tend to think it's the egg in this one, and that I think that there's kind of already an underlying tendency toward being hyper focused on something like that or narcissistic, then it can become a problem. I don't think it in and of itself causes that.
Okay, and actually, I'm going to end this interview with one more question because we're approaching the hour mark. So yeah, any final thoughts or last words for the listeners?
From the questions we got, it seems to be sorry about that. A pretty open-minded and well-informed audience. So, I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to check out my podcast. Not to shamelessly self-promote, but I don't know what else to really recommend. And if you're at all interested in ways to help, then I think some of the things that we talked about are important to try to understand it beyond the sort of media narrative.
I know that's actually a really good point. And just for everybody, just so everybody know, the link to her podcast is actually in the description. So I put it there. I should have pinned it, but I didn't get a chance to. Yeah, other than that, but yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I don't, I know we could stay all night going through questions, but I know it'll get pretty lengthy. So I appreciate the time, especially I know you have the kid, your child with you, and I know that can definitely make
Yeah.
things a little bit more difficult. Other than that, the only thing I got to say, I don't know. Next time I'll do an interview, I know it'll be sometime soon, but I'm definitely taking a vacation to Las Vegas on the 25th, so I'll be away from YouTube for a week because I need a break.
Well, that sounds good.
Oh yeah. I've never been. Other than that, I hope everybody have a good night. I'll see you next time when I post a pre-recorded video. Until then, have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for having me.